The gift that changed everything. A story of forgiveness and unity. On a New Year's Eve, a family marked by past hurts faces a decisive moment. The gift that changed everything. A story of forgiveness and unity takes us on an emotional journey of reconciliation and healing. Inspired by the parable of the prodigal son, the protagonist decides to open her heart to forgiveness, sparking a transformation that goes beyond a simple gesture. It's a true family renewal. Listen to this inspiring story that teaches us that often forgiveness is the greatest gift we can give. The parable of the prodigal son, found in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 15, verses 11 to 32, shows us how forgiveness can restore what seemed lost. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. Luke 15, verse 24. Just as the prodigal son was received with love and forgiveness, this story teaches us that it's never too late to start anew. New year, renewed family. The story of forgiveness that heals. A family and the weight of resentment. The house was full, as expected for a New Year's Eve celebration. The table was set with a white tablecloth, adorned with golden and silver details, and the aroma of freshly prepared food filled every corner of the room. Clara, the matriarch of the family, observed everything from the kitchen door, her heart both joyful and heavy. She had dreamed of this moment for weeks. Her children and grandchildren gathered to celebrate a new beginning. Yet, under the festive surface, she felt the weight of something unresolved. At the center of it all were her two sons. Daniel, the eldest, responsible and dedicated to the family, and Lucas, the youngest, who had left home years ago in pursuit of a dream that many considered reckless. Their relationship had been strained ever since Lucas returned, defeated by the failures of his choices, and sought forgiveness from the family. While Clara had embraced him with open arms, Daniel could not conceal his resentment. For him, Lucas's return was more than a family matter. It was a personal wound, a betrayal of trust. As the evening progressed, Clara couldn't ignore the tension in the air. The glances exchanged between her sons carried unspoken words, and moments of silence at the table spoke volumes. The joy of the children playing in the background clashed with the invisible barrier separating Daniel and Lucas. Clara knew that something had to change, but the question of how lingered in her mind like a shadow. While serving dessert, Clara remembered the teachings of the Bible, particularly the parable of the prodigal son. The story had always resonated deeply with her, not just as a tale of forgiveness, but as a guide to navigating the complexities of love and reconciliation. She silently prayed for wisdom, asking for a way to bring her family closer, to dissolve the walls that had formed over the years. The ringing of the New Year countdown interrupted her thoughts. Everyone gathered in the living room, glasses in hand, ready to welcome the new year. Clara joined them, her heart filled with hope that this would be the start of something transformative. As the clock struck midnight, hugs and well wishes were exchanged, but Clara knew the real challenge lay ahead. In that moment, she made a silent resolution. She would do whatever it took to rebuild the bonds that time and resentment had eroded. Little did she know, the journey she was about to undertake would change not only her family, but also everyone who crossed their path. The morning after the New Year's celebration began quietly. The house, still filled with the scent of the previous night's feast, seemed to rest after the commotion. Clara, however, woke early. While the others slept, she brewed coffee and sat by the window, her thoughts heavy with concern over the unresolved conflict between Daniel and Lucas. As she sipped her coffee, Clara's eyes fell on a small wooden box on the living room shelf. It was an old keepsake chest, filled with photographs and letters from the past. Drawn by the memories it held, she opened the box and began flipping through its contents. There were pictures of family vacations, birthday celebrations, and even a photo of Daniel and Lucas's children, their arms around each other, smiles wide and genuine. Amid the photos, Clara found a letter she had almost forgotten. It was a note Lucas had written to her years ago, during the time he had been away. The letter was filled with regret and a longing to reconnect, a side of him that Daniel had never truly seen. Clara realized that this piece of Lucas's story might be the key to starting the healing process. With the letter in hand, she decided to take action. She waited until Daniel was alone in the kitchen, helping himself to breakfast. As he poured coffee into his mug, Clara approached him, holding the letter tightly. "Daniel, can we talk for a moment?" she asked, her voice calm but resolute. He nodded, setting his mug down and leaning against the counter. "What is it, Mom?" Clara handed him the letter. "I think it's time you see this. It's from Lucas, written during the years he was gone. I don't expect it to change everything, but I think it might help you understand him a little better." Reluctantly, Daniel took the letter and began to read. His expression shifted as he scanned the words, from indifference to something deeper, an emotion he couldn't quite hide. Clara watched him closely, knowing this was just the first step in a much larger process. When he finished, Daniel folded the letter carefully and placed it back on the table. "I didn't know he felt this way," he said softly, his voice tinged with a mix of surprise and uncertainty. Clara placed a hand on his shoulder. "None of us are perfect, Daniel. But forgiveness isn't about who was right or wrong. It's about freeing ourselves from the weight of anger. You don't have to decide anything now, but I hope you'll think about it." Daniel nodded, his gaze distant but thoughtful. Clara left the kitchen, giving him space to process the revelation. She knew the journey toward reconciliation would not be easy, but for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope that it might be possible. As the day unfolded, the household became busier with preparations for the family's traditional New Year's dinner. The table was set with care, adorned with flowers and candles, and the kitchen buzzed with the aroma of dishes being prepared. The family moved around each other, their movements practiced but their conversations strained, as if everyone was tiptoeing around the unspoken tension between Daniel and Lucas. Lucas arrived later in the afternoon, carrying a small gift bag in one hand and a hesitant smile on his face. The moment he stepped into the room, Daniel's expression tightened. He greeted Lucas with a curt nod before focusing on arranging the cutlery on the table. Clara, noticing the shift in the atmosphere, stepped forward to greet her younger son warmly. "Lucas, I'm so glad you could come," she said, giving him a tight hug. Lucas's eyes scanned the room, landing briefly on Daniel before he replied, "It's good to be here, Mom. Happy New Year." As the evening progressed, the family gathered in the living room to reminisce about past celebrations. Laughter filled the air as old stories were shared, but Daniel remained quiet, only speaking when addressed directly. Lucas tried to engage him, offering a lighthearted comment about their childhood, but Daniel's response was clipped, his tone sharp enough to halt the conversation. Clara, seated between the brothers, felt the weight of their unresolved issues pressing down on her. She glanced at her husband, who gave her a reassuring nod but remained silent. It was clear to Clara that the moment of truth was approaching. When dinner was served, the family took their places around the table. The meal began with an awkward silence, punctuated by the clinking of utensils. Finally, Clara decided to break the ice. "Before we go any further," she began, her voice steady but firm, "I want to thank each of you for being here tonight. This family has been through so much, and I know there are things we need to address. But I believe that, together, we can find a way to move forward." Her words hung in the air, drawing the attention of everyone at the table. Daniel looked down at his plate, his jaw clenched, while Lucas shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Mom," Daniel said finally, his tone defensive, "some things can't just be brushed aside. Trust isn't something you can rebuild overnight." Lucas raised his head, his eyes meeting Daniel's. "I know I've made mistakes, Daniel," he said quietly, "but I've been trying to make things right. I just need a chance to prove that I've changed." The tension between the brothers was palpable, but Clara refused to let it derail the evening. The clinking of silverware against plates filled the silence at the dinner table. The aroma of roasted turkey, seasoned vegetables, and freshly baked bread wafted through the room. But the tension between Daniel and Lucas overshadowed the warmth of the meal. Conversations were fragmented, forced even, as if everyone was carefully avoiding the inevitable confrontation. Then, as if on cue, the discussion took an unexpected turn. Lucas, seeking to bridge the gap, recounted a fond childhood memory of a camping trip they had taken as a family. "Remember that time we tried to put up the tent, and it collapsed on top of us?" he said with a chuckle. Clara smiled warmly, and even a few other family members laughed, but Daniel's face hardened. He set his fork down and crossed his arms. "Funny how you always bring up the good times," Daniel said, his voice laced with sarcasm. "Conveniently forgetting everything else, aren't you, Lucas?" The table fell silent, the lighthearted atmosphere replaced with unease. Lucas swallowed hard, his earlier confidence waning. "I'm not trying to erase the past," Lucas replied, his tone softer. "I just thought, maybe we could focus on something positive for once." Daniel leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Positive? You mean like when you left us to deal with everything while you chased your dreams without a second thought?" His words hit like a blow, leaving no room for misinterpretation. Lucas's shoulders sagged as he absorbed the weight of his brother's accusation. "Daniel, I know I made mistakes," he admitted. "I was selfish, and I didn't consider how my actions would affect you or the family. But I'm here now, trying to make amends. Isn't that worth something?" Before Daniel could respond, Clara intervened, her voice firm yet tinged with emotion. "Enough, both of you. This isn't the time to rehash old wounds. We're here to celebrate a new year, a chance for new beginnings." Her words hung in the air, but the tension remained palpable. Clara glanced at her husband, who nodded subtly, signaling his support. "Lucas," Clara continued, her tone softening, "I believe you're sincere in wanting to make things right. And Daniel, I understand you're hurt. But forgiveness is a gift we give ourselves as much as others. Holding on to pain only deepens the divide." Daniel exhaled sharply, his frustration evident, but he said nothing. Lucas, meanwhile, looked at Clara with gratitude, though his eyes betrayed the lingering guilt he carried. The room was heavy with unspoken emotions, but Clara felt a glimmer of hope. The conversation wasn't resolved, but the first cracks in the wall between her sons had appeared. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As the evening continued, Clara realized that merely sharing a meal wouldn't be enough to heal the rift between her sons. With a deep breath, she rose from her chair, holding her glass high. Her voice carried a blend of determination and warmth as she addressed the room. "Family," she began, her gaze sweeping across the faces around the table. "Tonight isn't just about celebrating a new year. It's about reflection, growth, and forgiveness. And sometimes, that requires courage to face the past and hope to embrace the future." The family listened attentively, their earlier discomfort replaced by quiet anticipation. Even Daniel and Lucas, despite their tension, seemed drawn in by Clara's sincerity. Clara placed her glass down and walked over to a cabinet in the corner of the room. From it, she retrieved a small, weathered wooden box. Its surface was scratched and faded, but the way Clara held it suggested it was a cherished relic. "This," she said, lifting the box for everyone to see, "is something I've kept for years. It contains memories, letters, and little treasures that remind me of what truly matters. I believe it's time to share its contents with all of you." She returned to the table and carefully opened the box. Inside were faded photographs, a few trinkets, and folded pieces of paper. Clara pulled out a letter, yellowed with age, and unfolded it. "This was written by your father years ago," she explained, her voice trembling slightly. "He wrote it when he was struggling, trying to provide for all of us. It's a reminder of the sacrifices we've all made for this family." As she read the heartfelt words aloud, the room filled with an unexpected warmth. The letter spoke of love, perseverance, and the importance of unity, even during the hardest times. When she finished, Clara looked up to find tears in the eyes of several family members. Daniel and Lucas avoided each other's gaze, but the impact of their father's words was evident. "Life isn't perfect, and none of us are perfect," Clara continued, addressing her sons directly. "But we have the choice to make things better, to mend what's broken. That choice begins here, tonight." For a moment, silence hung in the air, heavy yet hopeful. Then Lucas spoke first, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, Daniel, for everything. I wish I could undo the hurt I caused, but I can't. All I can do is try to be better moving forward. Daniel's jaw tightened as he processed his brother's words. Slowly, he nodded, though he didn't speak. It wasn't full forgiveness, but it was a step in the right direction. Clara smiled faintly, feeling the fragile, yet significant shift in the room. The path to reconciliation would be long, but for the first time in years, it felt possible. As the atmosphere grew lighter, Clara decided it was the perfect moment to unveil her surprise. She rose again, a small, neatly wrapped package in her hands, tied with a ribbon. "This," she said, holding the gift in front of her, "is for both of you, Daniel and Lucas. I thought long and hard about what could represent what I hope for this family. Please, open it together." The brothers exchanged hesitant glances, but eventually, they reached for the package together, their hands brushing momentarily. Slowly, they unwrapped the gift, revealing a handcrafted wooden sculpture. It was of two intertwined branches growing from the same trunk, their leaves touching at the top. "This represents you both," Clara explained, her voice filled with emotion. "No matter how far apart you may grow, you share the same roots. You're part of something larger, something unbreakable." The room fell silent as the significance of the sculpture sank in. The symbolism was clear. Despite their differences, Daniel and Lucas were bound by the ties of family, and those bonds were worth preserving. Lucas was the first to speak. "It's beautiful, Mom," he said softly, tracing the intricate details of the sculpture with his fingers. Daniel nodded, his voice subdued. "It's a reminder that we need to stop fighting and start rebuilding. For us, for everyone here." Encouraged by their words, Clara smiled through tears, her heart swelling with hope. "That's all I've ever wanted," she said. "For us to see that we're stronger together than apart." As the evening progressed, the sculpture became a centerpiece of conversation. Family members shared their own stories of forgiveness and resilience, weaving a tapestry of unity through their words. The tension that had once hung over the room began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of shared purpose and newfound understanding. Though the path to full reconciliation was still ahead, the gift had planted a seed of hope. For the first time in years, the family felt closer, their bonds mending one step at a time. And for Clara, it was the start of a dream finally coming true. As the night continued, the warmth in the room seemed to grow stronger, like a fire that had been kindled from the ashes of old conflicts. The family began to share more than just pleasantries. They began to speak from their hearts. Lucas and Daniel, now sitting next to each other, began reminiscing about their childhood. They laughed as they remembered old family traditions, the games they used to play, and the long talks they once had about their dreams for the future. It was as though the walls between them had started to crumble, revealing the connection that had always been there, hidden beneath the layers of anger and resentment. "You remember when we used to argue over who got the last slice of cake?" Daniel asked with a grin, his eyes glinting with nostalgia. "Of course," Lucas replied, chuckling. "And you always claimed it was yours first, even though you had already eaten more than your share." The room filled with laughter, a sound that had been too rare in recent years. Clara watched them, feeling a mixture of relief and joy. This was what she had longed for, a return to the love and understanding that had once defined their family. As the evening wore on, the discussions grew deeper. Clara and her husband, Carlos, spoke about the importance of forgiveness in their own marriage. They shared the challenges they had faced and how they had learned to overcome them together. "We're not perfect," Clara said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "But we've always chosen to forgive, to keep going. That's the key to healing any wound." Carlos nodded, his hand reaching out to hold hers. "Love isn't just about the good moments," he said. "It's about sticking together when things are hard, when you feel like giving up." The family listened intently, reflecting on the weight of their words. For the first time in a long while, they understood the true meaning of forgiveness. Not as an obligation, but as a gift that could heal even the deepest wounds. And as the night drew to a close, Clara felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. The family wasn't fully healed yet, but they had taken the first step, and that was more than enough. The hope for a renewed bond, built on understanding and forgiveness, had been reborn. With that thought, Clara whispered a silent prayer, grateful for the gift of healing, knowing that, as the new year began, they were no longer just a family by blood, but a family united by love. As the final hours of the evening slipped away, the family gathered around the table, each person holding a different emotion, but all sharing a newfound sense of unity. Clara's heart swelled with gratitude as she looked at her loved ones, her gaze lingering on each face, appreciating the quiet power of forgiveness that had woven through the evening. The clock ticked past midnight, marking the arrival of a new year, and with it, the promise of new beginnings. Yet, for Clara, this moment felt like the true turning point. The old wounds that had separated them over the years had begun to heal, not through time, but through the courage to face them and speak the truth with love. Lucas, his eyes softer now, spoke with sincerity. "I know I've been stubborn," he began, his voice quiet yet filled with regret. "But I want you all to know that I'm ready to move forward. I don't want to carry this weight anymore." Daniel nodded in response, his voice steady but filled with understanding. "We've both made mistakes," he said. "But tonight was the first step toward putting it all behind us. Let's not let it define us anymore." Clara's eyes welled up with tears. The transformation she had hoped for was unfolding right before her eyes, and she realized that forgiveness wasn't just about the words spoken. It was about the actions that followed, the commitment to walk side by side, despite everything that had happened. As they embraced, Clara felt a deep sense of peace settle in her heart. The bitterness and division that had once seemed insurmountable were now replaced by a warmth that could only come from genuine reconciliation. Carlos, ever the quiet anchor in the family, stood beside Clara, his hand resting on her shoulder. "This," he said softly, "this is what family is about. Love, forgiveness, and the willingness to start over, no matter the past." And in that moment, the family understood. The new year wasn't just about making resolutions or waiting for time to heal the wounds. It was about making the choice to embrace each other with open arms, to forgive, and to move forward together. As they joined hands for one last prayer, Clara whispered a final wish for the year ahead. Not for success or perfection, but for a love that would always be stronger than any challenge they would face. A love rooted in forgiveness, unity, and the shared understanding that, in the end, they were all enough. With that prayer, the family's journey of healing had begun, and Clara knew that, no matter what the future held, they would face it together, stronger than before.